Hello, hello. Did the connection get made? I hope so. I can't see, hear, or smell you, but I can sense you all out there tuning in. And I'd like to say a very big welcome to you all. My name is Nicholas Roop, and I am the jury chairman of the Lovie Awards. And I'm coming to you from my home in St Albans, which is in the UK, which is in Europe, apparently. I want to say a big welcome to all of you, and we are thrilled you're joining us today for this event. And this year marks the 11th annual Lovie Awards, and we are so excited to debut this new event series that we've called Reshape What's Possible. The internet has been our glue through the pandemic, and so much incredible work has been created across Europe as the virtual became critical. So we're bringing our community together with these events to discuss what's next for the internet with some of the industry's most brilliant minds and most inspiring artists, from best practices in remote entertainment to how we fuel creativity and design from afar. Today, we're going to focus on the future of podcasts and audio with the legendary, uber-talented George the Poet, host and creator of Have You Heard George's Podcast and former Lovie Artist of the Year. We'll hear about George's experience as a creator living through the pandemic, how and why the podcast format can be so powerful, and the art of using the internet to give voice to stories that often go untold. A little bit of background on George, if you don't know him already, you probably do. George is a London-based spoken word performer of Ugandan heritage. His innovative brand of musical poetry has won him critical acclaim both as a recording artist and social commentator, and his work has been broadcast to billions of people worldwide. In 2018, he opened the royal wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle with the poem, The Beauty of Union. And in 2019, Have You Heard George's Podcast won a prestigious Peabody Award and 5 gold British Podcast Awards, including the highly coveted Podcast of the Year. George is now embarking on a PhD and completing chapter 3 of the podcast, which of course we're going to talk about later on. That's quite a list of accomplishments for someone who barely just turned 30. Anyway, we're going to find out about this great man in a moment. One last note before we do, we'd love to hear from you, all you watching at home or in the office or on a bus, whatever you're doing. So please feel free to use the Q&A module under the video to submit questions, and we'll get to them at the end of the chat. So George, I just mentioned I've been listening to your podcasts kind of back to back the last few days. You're in my head. I feel like I'm your best close friend, even though you've only met me a couple of times. I'm very excited to actually be able to talk back, and you might even talk back to me today. So this is going to be a real thrill. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome George the Poet.
Thank you very much, man. Very kind words. Appreciate that.
That's quite. How does it sound? It being read to you? It's like, yeah, I did that. Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it still feel good?
It feels good. I'm surprised at how the narrative just kind of plays out in very, isolatable moments. And it's like, wow, it took a lot of thought and to be able to just hit those headlines.
I actually heard you first through my son, who's 12, and he's a big fan, and they were talking about you at school. And I met you at the Lovie Awards, and you very kindly left a special message for my son, so we still play that very proudly. So thanks for that. So there we are. We had a connection there. Look at that. Let's start with the podcast, because that's how we met. That's how you came, into contact with the Lovie Awards. We wanted to recognise. We didn't. Our jury wanted to recognise how inspiring and important your podcast is, and really because of its it's unique in lots of ways, not just because of what the message, but the whole way you've brought that format together. Anybody who hasn't experienced it, I really recommend listening to it, because it's special. So, what was the journey? What kind of led you to creating the unique? I mean, I didn't know if you want to describe how you do it. As you can tell, I'm struggling to do it justice. You describe in your words what it is. And
I struggle too. That struggle's not easy. It's a hybrid form of storytelling. Some of it is journalistic, some of it is cinematic, dramatized. But ultimately, I'm trying to explain to myself first why I am seeing what I'm seeing around me in my community and in the music that I listen to, which is produced by the community that I'm part of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. But I mean, what was the process? Because obviously, we heard about podcasts. We thought podcasts might be something we want to try. We heard people kind of like trying different forms, more narrative forms, more like this and that, lots of interviews and these things. But you came to something that is in an interesting space between all these things. I wonder what was the process there, because I know you've got a kind of collaborator who you do a lot of the work with, but this very rich sort of textured space that you create feels like, I kind of wonder what the steps were to finding that.
Nick, it was a process of elimination.
Yeah.
Process of elimination brought me to podcasting. And what I was experimenting with was making myself understood in rhyme initially. Started off as a rapper, 15 to 19 years old. At 19, I started bending my rap to come across more like poetry. And I did that for some years. Took that to a more musical space after about 3 years, after having just done webcam performances like this. My early poems look like Zoom calls.
What, pre-pandemic? This is before you had to.
This was me responding to the kind of reclusiveness that I had to adopt while I was in uni.
Yeah.
My university was an intense experience. So the only time that I had to myself was time that I used to reflect and to continue my craft of rhyming.
Yeah.
Fast forward about 5 years, I'm in a record label, and I'm making songs and I'm making albums, and that was a great experience. There was a lot of success from that time. However, I just knew I needed more time. I needed more space. I needed a product that when it reached my listener, the listener was able to sit with for longer than 3 minutes, because there were things I needed to indicate and unpack that couldn't be done justice in 3 minutes.
Yeah, because you were
revealed itself as a solution to me.
So did you find, because I mean, your life as a recording artist was success. I mean, you were successful. You were on, you were rising and finding an audience. But did you just found the form too restrictive, or you couldn't? You didn't give you the space to.
There's a number of things I found which I was thinking about them for a couple of years. I was in the label. I was signed to Universal Music for like just under 2 years, and in the time there, I'd noticed a few things that meant that my needs wouldn't align with the music industry's needs at that time. I learned a lot from, I was a student of the industry. I was very appreciative of the education I got from the industry, but I knew that I was trying to create new demand, responding to the existing demand for a man with my skill set, a young Black man from the inner city who can rhyme. The existing demand dictated that I needed to be a rapper in order to make myself commercially viable. And being a rapper is more than just being a commercially viable rapper is more than just the performance of rap. It's the ideology and the expectations and the practices and the culture and the values. And I'm a student of rap. I admire so much about it, but at that time in my life, I think the sun had set on my dreams of presenting myself to the world as a rapper. I'd moved on, I'd become a poet from the age of 19. And that wasn't accidental, that was intentional. And I wanted to continue with that intention. So when I had realized that my time in the music industry would require that I invest a lot of effort in just convincing people that there are new opportunities outside of some of the formulas that were already successful. I just didn't want to. I was young. I was like 24. I was like, I'm not going to spend the rest of my 20s arguing with with A&Rs.
That's very telling. It's interesting as well because obviously when you think about rappers, it comes with a certain there's some restrictions, some limits. But also when you think about a poet, I don't think about podcasters working in this very sort of rich multimedia way that you do. So is that, I mean, how did that work as well? Because you establish yourself as a poet, but obviously you're writing things down and people are reading it, but primarily people are coming into contact with you through performance, essentially.
Yeah. But my poetry derived from rap. I learned poetry through rap. It's just that my ideas, I was writing a lot of essays, like I said, my educational experience was intense. So in uni, my first year, I was writing 4 essays a week, and these are heavy essays. It's a work rate that I had experienced at A level, but I'm now, we used to do supervision. So you'd write an essay and then you defend your perspective in a small group with one of the leading authorities on the subject. And that process over and over again for 3 years influenced the way that I wrote rhymes. Do you get me? And then it just made sense that was poetry. So by the time I'm interested in podcasting, Serial's taken off. How I Built This was a regular podcast that I would listen to. And these they made me aware that the audience expects long form content in podcasting. I was like, ooh, the audience actually wants more.
Yeah.
I could do, and I had experimented with poetic storytelling and musical storytelling since forever. So it's like, I'm going to tell stories. The stories are going to be longer than 5 minutes. And they're going to speak to an audience that is comfortable with me talking about things beyond the expectations of rap.
Yeah, it's important. I picked up on, what was it when I said it? I think there's a couple of quotes jumped out and I picked out. So our young people often feel they lack choices. Throughout this podcast, I have offered different ways of presenting Black voices. So is that part of this, the opportunity with something new to create new space or new possibilities? Is that what you're trying to?
Yeah. Thanks for that quote. I say so much stuff I can't even remember. But it's true. It's very, it's just naked. Like what I'm saying is, what you see is what you get. Like it is very important to me that I provide that young people get an alternative image of how they can engage with big conversations. Me, the most influential storytellers were rappers, and they tended to come from a particular experience. And I'm grateful for rap because without that space, it would be very hard to explain what the inner city is like with inner city language, language that respects the experience that we go through. That's what rap is. But at the same time, we need variety of thought. We need variety of perspectives. And if rap isn't primed to let a Cambridge graduate talk to our young people about what it takes to make it in education, or how to form an argument and just critically assess their environment. If rap can't do all of that, then someone needs to do it. It can't fall on the shoulders of rappers that haven't had the same experiences as me. So I want a young person to see another influential storyteller from their world that just shows them a different way of responding to the world.
You sort of have to see it to be it, the old adage, right? But it's more hear it to be it in this case, right? I mean, a part of that feels like, and it seems like it's bound up in the form where I think something that really hits me, I'm sure listeners will feel the same way, is, on one hand, you've got, again, this full spectrum of thoughts and, feelings, some of which are very tender that you wouldn't find in rap at all. Some things are really, really difficult subjects. And yet the experience is very beautiful, partly because of the sound mixing, the music, it kind of carries you through and gets you through what I think if it was all stripped back, it would be often too bleak or too difficult. And I think that's true. Obviously, that's true of art in many respects. Is the beauty of it kind of enables, like, allows engagement with something that you wouldn't deal with in a conversation. Is that something you've been very kind of mindful of, or is that just is that just essentially the work as an artist?
Yeah, I think I'm sure I mentioned this to you earlier, Nick, but for me, I started falling in love with Disney again, Renaissance Disney movies. And one of them was Pocahontas. And I was listening to the soundtrack of Pocahontas because I love the music of the experience. Listening to the Pocahontas soundtrack, and there's a song called Colors of the Wind. And I'm aware that the true story of Pocahontas was, was Disneyfied for the movie. So I think I was doing some research into that. But as I was listening to the lyrics, there's a line that's like, you can own the earth until all you own is earth, and still you can paint with all the colors of the world. But when I realized that there's all this ecological messaging built into the soundtrack of Pocahontas, and listening to different Disney soundtracks, you can hear different messaging built in. And I started to reverse engineer that process, and I was like, that must have been, a lot of thought clearly went into balancing the political, environmental messaging, the social messaging in these Disney films, because there's a lot of responsibility on Disney to, first of all, continue what the brand is supposed to be about, but also to adapt to the times and reflect current conversations. When I was reverse engineering that whole process in a Disney movie, I was like, I want that. You know what I'm saying? Like, just package messages in ways that leave you disarmed, in ways that the whole family can enjoy.
Yeah,
that's what happened.
Just finding a way through to people, basically finding the best way to reach people. It's funny, isn't it, how we sort of discount emotion sometimes, or we don't want to layer the soundtrack on because we think it manipulates people, but at the same time, we don't want to manipulate them, but we want to reach them.
You want to make a point, like I was, I'm doing this PhD now, and I'm just doing my literature review, reading through the work of people that are talking about stuff that I want to get a grip on. And these people have fascinating ideas all over the world. There's PhDs all over the world about amazing stuff. However, the language that a lot of it is put in, the jargon, the terminology, it's just like a barrier to feeling, to this emotional connection. I was reading something earlier by a guy who's promoting a way of understanding value that is anthropological. So it looks at the human stories and how cultures define values. And in his opening remarks, the guy was like, anthropologists and sociologists often are slightly removed from political engagement because there's something that happens in the writing of the anthropological analysis that just doesn't reach political. And I'm like, yes, all this language. If I said to you, lift your rib cage and contract your diaphragm, you'd be like, what? But that's just inhaling. It's breathing in.
Yeah, totally. Breathe in, Nick. Otherwise, this podcast is going to be a short one. That's cool. Excellent. So, I mean, obviously, we're focusing a lot on the podcast, but you, I guess, because you're focused on the message and you're focused on reaching people, you're not like, it doesn't matter. It could be filming, it could be anything, right? You're open about that. And I saw, recently you put out the film Black, Yellow, Red about the lead up to the Ugandan elections, and also to mark your 30th birthday. What happened there? Because again, it was beautiful. I mean, it was like a beautiful, beautiful film, but again, it was a tough message. What was the journey there?
Thank you. Yeah. So at the start of the podcast, I started talking about Ugandan politics, and I started from I would say quite a removed place, and I was speaking on the drama, which a lot of the news covers when it comes to Ugandan politics. The leader of the opposition, Bobby Wine, treated with brutality, and his campaign and his career have been frustrated and sabotaged from so many angles as a result of his criticism of the government.
Mm.
And that was my obsession at first, just like many of us in the West. We're obsessed with the idea that someone who means well is not being able to speak freely. But then being on the ground in Uganda, there are a lot of people that will tell you, we are coming from war. We have no track record of a peaceful transition of power. Our economy is the most stable and tolerable that it has been for 60 years. We're having different conversations. You guys in the West are over here talking about freedom of speech and democracy when none of these things were ever on the cards for us.
Yeah.
So are you having a grown-up conversation, or are you having an idealistic pontification? And in Black, Yellow, Red, I'm finally reckoning with that, because I started writing about it in 2018 and got into arguments with my family. Some people felt like, you know, it's a dog chasing its tail, or the blind leading the blind. Why are you signaling this to your audience when you don't have answers? You just have complaints. So after like 2 years of reckoning with that, the Ugandan election happened to fall on my birthday, and I felt like it was compelling me to just make a statement and put something out. We started filming it before it became complicated in my mind. So we went out to Uganda, just grabbed all this footage, and I sat on it, and then I just refined it in order to release it.
And what did you find? I mean, obviously it didn't go the way that you were hoping it would go, but what was the response from the Ugandan side anyway? I mean, in terms of, you know, your pitch and your you know, the case you made.
The response was great because of the criticisms of my family. My family were like, tell every angle. If you're really trying to help Uganda, don't just swallow a Western narrative and regurgitate it back to us in a patronizing way. Listen to everyone, try and represent where everyone's coming from. And that was like harder to do than what I initially set out to do. But what I initially set out to do was less helpful. You know, usually the harder is the more rewarding one. Yeah. But because of that compromise, everyone felt listened to, everyone felt heard and represented in at least something that I said. Yeah.
It's a difficult, you know, you're well known for not shying away from politics, and obviously it's something you've dealt with in your kind of academic life as well. I pulled another quote out from, you'd be pleased to know, hopefully you're as pleased about this one as the last one, but you have more strong opinions than New York has condominiums, but you can't stand to be accountable to anyone. So is this... yeah, that's a good, I don't know, what sort of smile is that? Is that a happy smile? But I thought it was a great quote because it kind of illustrates, I think, I mean, I'm going to ask you the question because I've made assumptions, but is it a difficult balance between, you know, on one hand, wanting the freedom as an artist to look at the situations and kind of find you know, the ideas and language around it to help people access the issues and understand them better, and on the other hand, put your hands in there and grab the situation and deal with it as a politician? Is that a tension, or have you just decided I'm taking the road of the artist and that's my lot? Where do you stand?
Well, you know, Nick, like I said, I fell in love with rap first, and this criticism really sprang out of my love for rap. That's my ultimate criticism of rap. You're not accountable. You as rappers, you're not accountable to anyone. You say whatever you want and you criticize everything. But like at the end of the day, you get paid. You just get paid to talk, and that's it. And I'm scared of becoming that. But this has been on my mind for half of my life. So knowing that I had the interest and the passion to serve my community, maybe at the level of an elected public office, and knowing that I didn't go that route, I'm concerned. I'm continually concerned that I'll never deliver the full product of my, passion for my people, for people generally. I don't want it to just be like I just have a self-serving career. And I want to be transparent with my audience about that. So if people wonder, people say to me, you could make, if you just talked about relationships more, if you talked about the hood more, like what you say would resonate with more people. But there are reasons why I can't just, you got to create new demand. You have to, don't just go with it because it's easy. There are things that need to happen. And if we don't confront these things, then there's no reason why we should expect anyone else or the generation after us to do so.
Yeah. And I think it relates a bit back to what you're saying about finding fresh voices as well. So I think it's the danger, isn't it, of becoming a product that you get kind of trapped in that. And I guess it's also behind why you keep changing it up, because you don't want things to get too repetitive. Obviously, the podcast is something that has a really strong backbone, but it's a bunch of other, it represents a bunch of other things. And actually, on that note, well, first of all, a little bit of information would be very handy. When is the next one due? When are we going to hear that?
The next one is coming within the next few months. We're almost finished with the recording completely. Definitely soon.
And you presumably the recording part happens, and then there's the editing part. Are you very involved in the sitting down and starting to put it all together? Because it's the post-production must be.
As we go along, we record, edit, and make joint decisions. Shout out to my producer, my collaborator, Ben Brick. He makes music, but he also does sound design, and he happens to be world class at both. So he can, just between the two of us, we navigate our way through 99%.
And that must be a lot of fun as well, right? Putting
It's just like how I was when I was in schools. You want to be in a good mood when you're working.
Yeah. And do you do any sound effect? Do you do any bit of Foley together or anything like that? If you need some footsteps or something, do you get on the...
We've done some weird stuff, some crazy stuff, fun, but it had to be done.
And when we had a little chat last week, and you were saying, as well as the podcast, you're also kind of recognizing that the way that people relate to the show, the subjects of the show, that they naturally want more conversation, want to engage in those topics. So you're doing some stuff around the podcast as well, right, to enable that. Is that correct? Or do you not want me to commit you to that in front of an audience?
No, that is right. Like this, the audience can expect that with the rollout of this chapter, there will be a platform for us to take the conversation beyond the listening experience. So once you've heard an episode, you can answer a series of questions and just give me feedback. Just let me know what you're thinking. I'm not looking for anything other than your reaction. So that will be on a special platform that I've spent the last year building with my very skilled team. Shouts out to all my my partners in that project, and more information on that will follow.
Super interesting. And we'd definitely be super interested to see how that's shaped up. Have you taken to the life of it's not really a web designer, but like an app developer? You're more new territory. How's that experience been for you?
Yeah, it's been an education. It's been great to watch something that, again, all of this emerged from my need to communicate. So it springs from my imagination. I speak about it with very clever people, and I watch them go, and I watch them, like there's 4 of us in our meetings, in our weekly meetings, and these guys are so clever. They're just bouncing ideas back and forth, and this is all out of something that I kind of set in motion. So they
delivered. They delivered, because they're all, if you notice, that everybody's very good at acting clever. It's just whether they actually deliver or not.
Yeah.
Did they deliver?
These guys deliver.
Good. Well, I'm very happy to hear that. So from what you were saying earlier, before the pandemic, you were pretty used to this whole kind of sitting in front of a computer, broadcasting to the world. So you had a bit of a head start in a way. But have you found the you know, what we calling it? Is it just the pandemic this week? What's
Yeah,
this?
let's stick to that pandemic.
Yeah.
That it hasn't been the easiest, you know. I realized the importance of movement in what I do, seeing different environments. When I was in school and I became a rapper at 15 years old, I used to write a lot of lyrics on the bus. My bus ride was an hour and a half. So I'm moving through different environments, and I'm being in lockdown, I realized how much of a different, again, becoming George the Poet, when I arrived at Cambridge, there was a contrast in environments that really drew out my thoughts. But I've just had to come up with creative new sources of inspiration being in lockdown.
Yeah, and we all. And yeah, one thing outside of in your sphere, but kind of outside of our immediate surroundings, something that obviously popped up in my mind was you know, that was pandemic related, was one of the big, you know, big breaths of fresh air, which is obviously some of the, you know, the change of the guard in the US, and you know, the Amanda Gorman performance at the inauguration. It felt like that kind of shook the world in a very positive way, a very kind of, you know, important pivot in time. I just wanted to hear what you felt about it as someone who's very much in that you know, in that kind of realm, as you experienced very much at the royal wedding, with the world's eyes at you, you know, waiting for you to say something profound. What did you make of that?
Yeah, it was it's like being released or excused from any tense and stressful situation. On the one hand, you're relieved, but on the other hand, you're a little bit shell-shocked from like everything that took place. So as beautiful as the Amanda Gorman performance was, and as much as it smiled for me to see a new commentator ushering in a new era, you know, there's still this darkness that's lingering for me.
Yeah.
We just saw from previous administration and the things that it's revealed, because I don't. It's tempting to feel like, and then they all lived happily ever after. And the right people won, but it's one thing that the past couple of years has shown me, that it's not that simple.
No. But I suppose the sense that new forms, and to your earlier point, you know, these kind of new voices and new expressions that don't just kind of aren't limited by the previous formats and boxes, that there's something positive to take from that.
100%.
All right, cool. Well, we have got a few questions coming through, so from the audience. So I'm just going to ask you some of those, if that's all right. So it feels like podcasts are starting to gain new foothold in our culture. Do you think we are still at the beginning of this medium and its potential?
I do definitely think we're at the beginning of the medium of podcasting. That's one thing that drew me to it. I noticed that the innovation I wanted to bring was unexplored in the way that I was interested in doing it. And as Nick mentioned earlier, constantly switching up the form. We'll never settle on a way of doing this thing, because there's something so intimate about entering someone's listening space. The way you architect your contribution to that space is completely up to you. It's completely up to you. There's so much less constraint, because, you know, without the visual element, if you do it like me, straight audio, you're quite limitless, man. You're really limitless. So enjoy it.
Yeah. So we were, you know, it's another way of saying, come on, let's see what you can do, everyone. You know, you just heard it from George. You can do anything. On that note, just someone else asked, you know, if you are starting your own podcast, where should you begin? Obviously, the beginning is a good place, but beyond that,
start with why, as my friend Simon Sinek would say. Why are you making a podcast? Your why should probably tell you who you're trying to talk to. And if you don't know who you're trying to talk to, why do you not know? All of these, just the question why will inform how you should approach your thing, because your podcast should be personal to you. It should be unique to your situation. And all of those factors, no one understands better than you.
Nice. And we've got another one, which is poet Eldridge Danticat has said, misery won't touch you gentle. It always leaves its thumbprints on you. And they ask, how has quarantine changed your art? So misery won't touch you gentle. It always leaves its thumbprints on you. How has quarantine changed your art?
You will definitely hear quarantine in the new chapter of my podcast. You'll hear me returning to this room that I'm in right now, from an out of body perspective. I'm showing you how I spent many of these days, and where I'm still in it, I still feel like we are, like I said, you become released from a tense and stressful situation. The memory of it is still fresh. You know what I'm saying? Kind of become institutionalized. I can be on a Zoom call right now and have no concept of how many people are watching me, but this is my new reality. So I can't necessarily say to you objectively how it's changed my art, but I know that you'll definitely see it. And that's the beauty of art. You can just capture your reality without fully understanding it.
Yeah. You're going to have to keep that room, whatever happens, wherever you go, and you're going to have to keep that room because it's the only place that's got that sort of audio reverb signature that it has. And everybody will always know if you're not in that room. So yeah, you got to hold on to that. Do you think, so another question from the audience, do you think podcasts are inherently different than video interviews?
Not inherently different. They can be if you so wish. For me, my podcast is different from any video interview I can give. And in order to visualize the podcast, I got to be very meticulous, more meticulous than I would be in a video interview. So yeah, but again, it's all about how you choose to approach it. I didn't want my podcast to be freewheeling conversation, not because I don't believe in freewheeling conversation, just because I had different needs, different reasons for even coming to the space.
Yeah. Is it, on that note, did you, in terms of your series, are you thinking about each one as having a kind of, I mean, the next one that's coming that has its own kind of contained thought, or you're trying to unpack something specific over the course? You see it as a set, an album or whatever?
I challenge myself to present as much of what is important to me as I can. That's what I try and do. So it's tempting to say, this is the core thought and this is the core idea. And obviously for marketing purposes, we got to figure that out. But I find it restrictive to think like that at the outset. I listen to what's going on around me. I listen to what's going on inside me. And I try and offer something of maximum utility, maximum usefulness to my listener.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting. You quoted the cynic, your friend cynic and his why. His name's very close to cynic, isn't it? It's unfortunate because he's not really cynic. He's kind of the opposite. I'm sure the poet in you would find that appealing. But if you were going to, I mean, it's sort of clear what your why is, but what would you say it is? Because it sounds like obviously art is your means, but there's a why driving this enterprise.
Yeah. Now that I'm getting into this PhD, that's what I got to figure out. Like, what's the why? What do you think can change? What's your theory of change? So I'm developing one, and right now it looks like something about creating a cooperative model of art, mission-oriented art. One of my PhD supervisors is the economist Mariana Mazzucato. She was the one that offered me the opportunity to convert some of my ideas about art into research. And Mariana founded the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, which does what it says on the tin:
Yeah.
innovation, public purpose. Within this department, within this faculty, they have a mission-oriented ethos and network. And the idea is that we can live by missions. What do we as a group think is important to achieve together? And instead of telling ourselves that we can only allocate however much money for the end of knife crime or the climate action agenda, instead of cutting off how much we're going to spend on these things, let us commit as a group to collaborating on these things and respond to the requirements. This is how the podcast was born. I'm responding to the requirements of the challenge. All my art is in response to the requirements of the challenge. So I guess I'm trying to create a system that young people can inherit, so that when they become commentators, artists, and creatives, they are prepared to incorporate their own theory of change within their art.
So it's kind of using art to make the change cultural. So it's not just messages; it's something kind of embodied and part of it. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, we're not short of challenges, are we, today? We're not short of colossal, like, very tricky things to solve. And I'm sure I feel very much like you that creativity is a central tenet, is a central kind of tool to enable that change and inspire that change. And yet sort of always seems to be sidelined, or perhaps a bit like what you were saying earlier about rap. It has these forms that seem kind of neutered, or they don't seem powerful because they're not engaged in the right way, or they're held in their formats, or they're held in their books, or they're held on their their TV half an hour slots, and they can't be part of culture. They can't, and because they can't become cultural, they can't enable the change. Do you think is that a sort of what you were talking about?
No, 100%. Someone, I can't remember who was saying it to me, but someone was talking about how we organize I think it was on one of these PhD calls. We organize our responses to problems in the world with a top-down mentality. There is an authority that is going to inform what the agenda should be, and everyone else should follow what that authority thinks, or what the authorities land on. But one of my biggest teachers, rap music, didn't emerge as a top-down initiative, yet it liberated so many of us. Yeah. So there are probably organic solutions that occur within human beings and remember, rap came from really traumatic circumstances in communities that were thrown together. These ghettos that we come from are patchwork communities, because in the case of Britain, and in the case of my council estate, for some reason that is unexplained, you can't find the logic behind this policy, but all the Black people were allocated the same public housing in Brent. You know what I mean? We live in the same areas for some reason. Yep. So yet out of that environment in East London, grime emerged. And now the generation after us are developing UK drill music. These are patchwork communities thrown together, to share the leftovers of the housing or the welfare system. And out of this accidental situation becomes a very clear strand of innovation. It's crazy. And it just keeps getting stronger and stronger. So when you give people time, resources, space to be creative, something's going to happen.
Yeah. And because you talked a bit last week about how much you've taken from the rap world, and obviously you look at people like Jay-Z, they're musicians, but actually they're more like business people, masterminds, strategists, bringing all these things together. And I think in keeping with a lot of the themes we've been talking about, they're constantly busting out of the boxes. They're constantly kind of mixing it up. And so is that part of why you see them as so interesting? Because they're,
because if you follow rap, what you end up with is an ethnography or an anthropology, like an anthropological study of these guys. You get really detailed information about their thought process year on year. And then outside of what they say about themselves, you can read about their results. You can read about their outcomes. You can see who got married to who and what kind of environment they created around themselves professionally, and how their proteges went on to perform in the music. You know, Kanye West is a protege of Jay-Z, and they're both really, really influential, really successful. You can reverse engineer that and just figure out why that worked and what it would take to standardize and systematize that kind of success.
I mean, where do you stand on the kind of business side of it? Because obviously that's an opportunity for you as well to take that approach, but at the same time you have this kind of tension with the why again, and what you see as your role in building culture. Are those things compatible, do you think?
I think they are compatible. Hip hop has taught me, you know, like there's been a lot of anti-capitalist rhetoric in my generation, and I've read a lot of anti-capitalist thought or critical thought, critical theory, just having been someone who studied the social sciences at this time in history. Critical theory is very popular in academic spaces and among young people, and it's been helpful for me figuring out what I am going to actively resist in my life and in my career. However, I wouldn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I believe that business allows us to carry our message out into the world better than any other system that we currently have. Maybe the generation after us will figure it out, and what I'm saying right now will become outdated. But right now, the industry of music, the industry of messaging, of influencer, of celebrity, that has been an ally, as far as I'm concerned, to the Black particularly struggle, and to other struggles, to the LGBTQ struggle, to the trans struggle, you know, to the struggle for gender equality. We can capitalize on the space that we have to create really interesting messages, and business needs to be navigated in order for those changes to be sustainable.
Yeah. Right. I think we've got one more question from the audience, which is how do you plan your podcast? We kind of touched a little bit on it earlier, but how do you plan, and how far ahead do you start the planning process?
I guess I just think about what I'm trying to say. That is the driving element of the podcast. Figuring out how to put it across is a question of listening to everyone else. So I guess when I'm listening, I'm just actively looking for the things that work, and you can find that everywhere. You can find that in the most seemingly throwaway game show about love, the latest one, however they repackage it, right? But if you follow the storytelling patterns and you try and reverse engineer what you're watching or what you're listening to from the producer's perspective, from the commissioner's perspective, from the perspective of the talent, from the perspective of all the jobs that are involved, you're going to become curious, and you're going to learn things that you can incorporate within your style of storytelling.
Yeah, that's great. And I've got one last question for you, which is what have you learned, implemented, or embraced over the last year that will become parts of your organization moving forward?
I've learned to rely on people more, ask people for help more because of lockdown. Also because I was becoming a fiance. I'm now a fiance. But
congratulations.
Thank you very much.
A lot has happened in the last year.
A lot has happened, but yeah, because I entered that relationship at the start of last year. And one of the things I learned was the importance in letting go of what you think you can control, and in trusting the processes around you, in trusting the people around you, and accepting, that life is a dialogue, it's a two-way conversation, not a monologue.
Yeah. Great. Well, I mean, from all of us at the Lovie Awards, I just want to say a massive thank you for sharing all that with us. It's incredible. And, now everybody is going to go and dive into your podcast, and it'll, bring it even more to life. And, and hopefully we'll everybody be following you on the journey from here on in, which it's going to be fantastic and inspiring. And you're really, one of our great exemplars, because, I think that's why we love the internet and all this stuff so much, is because it creates new new things all the time, and it creates new opportunities and new freedoms. And actually, you need fantastic, inspiring artists to take opportunity of that freedom and use it for positive things, not all the awful things that are happening. So thanks a lot for sharing that with us. I really, really appreciate that, George. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, mate.
Cheers. Right. So, George, thank you for joining us today. It was a massive, massive privilege. Like I said, just a few housekeeping notes. We have our next event coming up on June the 16th. And this one is going to be all about virtual entertainment and best practices in remote production and events, something I'm sure a lot of you've had some experience with over the last few months. Lineup of guests will be announced soon, so be sure to follow us on social for details. We hope to see you there. And finally, of course, it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention that the Lovie Awards entry deadline is coming up soon, which is the April the 23rd. So mark that in your diary as enter our fantastic award before for the awards before the 23rd, and you can enter your work, which is at the lovieawards.com, which has changed. So make a note of that, lovieawards.com. And thank you again for joining us, and have a beautiful Wednesday. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much.